Let's get into some of the details of the differences between a server and a server group. The relationship is broadly that a server must belong to a server group. Even if a group only contains one server, that relationship must be enforced. Server groups are defined in the domain XML and are managed by the domain controller. Servers are defined in the host XML and are managed by the host controller. Each server group must have a profile associated with it. Applications are deployed onto the server groups, which means that all servers within that group will have all of the same applications deployed on them. If a server group has 3 servers in it and an ear or a war is deployed to the group, then the ear will be deployed on all 3 servers. This is really one of the purposes of a server group in general. All servers in the group are going to be identical. They will be configured in an identical way, and they will have all of the same applications running on them. If you recall, standalone works a little differently. There is really only a single profile, so to speak, that operates against that standalone server. But everything that goes into a profile can also be applied to a standalone server. So, back to the server group. It again is defined in the configuration file of your domain controller, in our case, domain.xml. It uses the server groups element to wrap all of our individual server group definitions. Here's an example of a server group. We have named it server group name, and our profile is profile to use. Some child tags of the server group include the JVM. You can define several different JVM settings, for instance, to include different amounts of memory made available to your servers in your server group. You can define a socket binding group. Socket binding groups may be overridden by the host, so they're not required to be in the server group. They could be defined in the server. Okay. The deployment section lists the applications to be deployed onto the group. However, it should be noted that you can't edit this directly. This is automatically generated when you deploy applications to the server. Finally, you can update or change system properties for your entire server group. Keep in mind, however, that system properties are generally speaking better off being set at the server level rather than the server group level. This is because individual servers will be running on different hosts generally, which may have different system resources available. So if you set the system properties at the server group level, you need to ensure that all of your servers are running on fairly identical systems. To actually set up the server group in your system, you do this through your command console or through the CLI. We'll do a very simple example right now. In our domain controller, here we've gone to the server page and the server groups page. We have 2 server groups that we configured in our last chapter, the main server group and the other server group. Here we're going to add another one. It's very simple. I'm going to call this test server group. And I'm going to use the HA profile and the HA sockets. Again, the socket bindings could be overridden at the server level. I'm going to go ahead and save my server group. We see it there. We're using HA sockets for the HA profile. This is automatically updated in the XML. So here I'm going to show you the domain.xml file. And here you can see our test server group using the HA profile with HA sockets. It is broadly the responsibility of the domain controller and the host controllers to ensure that all servers in the server group have a consistent configuration. The servers will all be configured with the same profile, and they'll have the same deployment content deployed to them. Now that we've configured a server group, which at this time has no servers associated with it, let's take a look at configuring a server. Again, in domain, every server must be a member of a group. So as you can see here, the group attribute is a part of the server tag. The servers tag shows up in the host configuration. Remember, the host is responsible for the servers, whereas the domain controller is responsible for the server group configuration. Here in our servers section, we see a number of children to our server tag. We can define paths. We can define interfaces. We can define specific socket bindings, system properties, and again, we can even override the JVM settings that we inherit from the server group. Practically any setting set by the server group, except for the profile, may be overridden at the server level. The name attribute is required. It represents the name of the server. It has to be unique within the host. The group attribute is required and must reference a server group name that is defined in the domain XML. The autostart attribute defaults to true, although you can set it to false if you want the server to not start automatically when the host is started. You can define or override any necessary file system paths in the Paths section. The Interfaces section allows you to define or override the settings of a network interface. The socket bindings and JVM are areas where you can override settings that come to you from the server group configuration. To add a server to a server group, you use the server configurations page. Let's take a look at this in our live example. So, on our server page for our domain controller, we were at our server groups page. Now we're going to go to our server configurations page. Notice there are no items here. This is because we're actually looking at the master host, which is our domain controller. If we go to host 3, we can see server 3. If we go to host 2, we can see server 1 and server 2. However, if we go back to server groups, no matter what host we're looking at, it will always show us all of the server groups that are available for this domain controller. So back on our server configurations, let's go to host 3, which only has one server at this time, and let's add a new server. We'll call this test server. Its server group, a drop-down box, allows us to choose server groups that have already been defined. Note that you cannot change this value. You can't type in your own name at this point and have a server group be magically created from the server screen. In my case, I'm going to set up a port offset of 2000, and I'll let auto start be true. And there we have it. Test server is up and running. Now that we have our test server set up, let's take a look at how this gets put into our host config XML file. Here's our host config, and as you can see, here's our server. Test server is part of the test server group. Auto start set to true. It uses the HA sockets with a port offset of 2000. From the XML, we can see that we have our server up. If we go to our runtime, we can see that our server is started, and we can access the server on our port offset, giving a support number for the web server at 10,080 rather than the usual 8080. And there you have it. Everything is all up and running. In the next section, you'll be doing some labs to set these up yourself.